Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lifespan Development. I'm Dr. Gotti. I'm going to be the instructor slash narrator slash grader slash everything in between for this course this particular semester. I know we're kind of coming together here in very unusual circumstances, and my guess is that we won't be doing something like this in the spring, even though I guess we can't guarantee anything. But hopefully, even though we're going to be doing this course in kind of a different format, you'll still be able to get just as much out of it as you would if this was an in-person class. What I'm going to be doing in this very first recording is just giving you a brief overview about what to expect in the class in terms of the format, and also some basic hints as to how to be successful as we transition into this new medium of instruction for, well, many of you for the very first time. As I mentioned in the previous slide, what we're going to be doing primarily in this video is just giving a broad overview of what this class is all about. We won't be going into the subtle details of lifespan development within this one. That's actually reserved for our next lecture. But what we will be doing in this particular one is talking about how we're going to be approaching the material, how you're going to be graded, and as I mentioned, we'll close it out with some suggestions for how to be successful. Now make sure after you're done with this one and you've taken copious notes and you're ready to go, that you also watch the next video that goes into a ton of detail that you'll want to know as you start to approach the different areas of developmental psychology. My hope is that you'll have a good understanding of the lens that developmental psychologists look through to understand people, and doing that, you'll have a much greater appreciation for some of the really interesting topics that we get to explore within this class. So how will we try to get this information across to you in this online medium? I know some of your instructors right now might be planning to have you just log into Zoom and give full hour and a half lectures or something along that line every single day that you would typically have a class. I've been doing this a number of years, and what I found with most of my online classes is having those synchronous meetings tend to be a little bit overwhelming and also under effective for a lot of students. So what I've decided to do in this particular class is kind of follow the format of what the textbook does, and that's break the class up into different sections that you can try to attack really at sort of your own pace, even though we are going to be keeping kind of a weekly schedule. And to understand the material, we're going to partition it out in a bunch of different ways. You're going to have assigned readings, which are really critical. You're also going to have presentations, not hour and a half long presentations, but asynchronous presentations that usually will range anywhere from around 30 minutes to, I think the cap is about 60 minutes. And I don't usually go near that cap because I know how hard it can be to pay attention in some of these videos for more than 20 or 30 minutes. And those will be your two main sources of information, and then to ensure that you are keeping up with things, I am going to require weekly written assignments for each of these different modules that we're going to have, and you are going to be expected to come to what we'll quote-unquote call lecture for this semester. But as I mentioned, the majority of the information is going to come across in these presentations, which are asynchronous, which means we're going to reserve our lecture times for really just catching up on things, me giving you announcements, kind of cheering you on as we're progressing through stuff, and just making sure that everything that we're covering in these videos and everything else that's being addressed in the class is crystal clear. We'll talk a little bit later about lecture attendance and how you're graded on that, but I just want you to be aware that essentially these lectures are really designed not to get new information across to you, but to just make sure that everything that you are receiving in this online medium is clear and you're feeling comfortable, at least to the same level you would be at this if this were an in-person class. Now, the other big thing that you want to be aware of for this class is there are 3 exams. These exams are going to be all multiple choice. You'll be taking them on Blackboard, and they are all 45 questions long and they're going to last 50 minutes. Now, these exams are not going to be cumulative. They'll only cover their separate sections, and that's really important because as you're going to see in the next lecture, A lot of these modules kind of cluster together into three distinct groupings. And essentially all you're going to be tested on with each of the exams is the distinct cluster of information that we're covering at any given time. But when it comes to what you're going to be tested on, be warned that just watching these presentations is not sufficient. The tests will look at your understanding of material from the readings and also really gauge your ability to kind of break down the things that we've covered both in the readings and in the presentations. Since we can't really referee whether or not people are using their textbooks or their notes for the exams, the only way to make this test fair and kind of representative of understanding is to make sure that most of the questions are about you extrapolating the information from the class and kind of being able to apply it to specific situations. There will be a couple basic questions that are probably very straightforward as to what we're looking for, but you're going to probably find more application-based questions than you're accustomed to simply because of the situation that we find ourselves in right now. Forewarning, that means you got to study a little bit more than maybe you think you do with this being an online class. The thing that I really want to highlight are these written assignments. I know in some of your other classes there are weekly written assignments, but this is not typically the case for my lifespan development class. I like to have 2 papers and 3 exams, but in this current world, we tend to have a lot of students that fall by the wayside in these online classes. And the best way to encourage students to stay on top of things and not become overwhelmed when it comes to a paper being due or an exam happening is for us to have weekly assignments on the weeks where we don't have exams. So when the assignments come about, you're going to see for each of them a value assigned to the different components to each assignment. Usually each assignment will have at least 2, oftentimes 3, 4, 5 different components to it. And they will all add up to 15 points, regardless of kind of the breakdown of where the points are going to be assigned. Some will ask you for comprehensive summaries of what we were covering in that specific module, or we can sometimes call it week. And others will ask you to apply what we were learning to specific situations. Sometimes this might be hypothetical situations and things like case studies, or other times it could be about your own life. Things that you can kind of relate to from the material, I guess, to your own life. Please be sure when you're doing this, though, that you stay within the confines of the material. It's always great to add stuff, but if it detracts from showing me that you understand what we're covering, I will have to take off some points on these assignments because it's suggesting that maybe you weren't quite where you were supposed to be by the time you had to submit this assignment. This also relates to requiring full responses. You are always welcome to go beyond the suggested lengths for a lot of the questions that you see, but you have to remember when you are responding to these things that I need to be able to gauge your comprehension of stuff from what you wrote. So choppy written paragraphs are very big indicators that somebody doesn't quite understand things. Now, obviously, there's other reasons for this, but just understand that when I'm trying to gauge where you're at in your comprehension, clear writing really helps me do that. And if it's not clear, I have to assume there's still a lot of gaps in your understanding. You will be graded again, 15 points on all of these, and they need to be uploaded onto the class site by the due date and time. If I recall correctly, for this particular class, our due date and time for these written assignments is always going to be on Thursdays. I think it's 11 a.m., but double check the syllabus. I don't want to tell you something that's not accurate and not forewarn you that you want to see that. It's listed on the syllabus. You'll also see it on the class site, and you always want to double check that what you're uploading onto the class site was transferred correctly. That means no Google sharing, no Apple files that the Blackboard site can't access. Essentially, when you submit your post, you should see the actual writing on there. If you try to do links or other crazy stuff like that, I'm going to have to mark those submissions as late. I've been around enough to know that move of submitting a Google link and just editing it and working on it long after it's due. I also know the file corruption issue that sometimes pops up, and I understand that many of these issues can be earnest, but for me to be fair to everybody, I need to make sure that you not only have something turned in on time, but that thing that you turn in on time is accessible. Those are critical elements to this. And again, on time matters. These things are submitted on Blackboard. So Blackboard doesn't really care about reasons for why something's a second late. If something's late, it will be flagged as late, and you will receive a grade deduction on this. This is something that's listed in the syllabus as to how much you lose, but just understand that what you lose is pretty substantial. So multiple missed submissions are really going to hurt your overall grade, and I promise the other thing they're going to hurt is just your ability to engage in the class. To stay on top of things, you really need to try to get this stuff done in advance. Trying to do something a couple seconds before it needs to be submitted is never a good approach. And if you really want to master this information, like I'm guessing many of you do because of, well, the fact that this is an upper division class, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the best way to do that is to make sure you're working on these things hopefully days in advance. It can really help you not only do well on these assignments, but get the most out of the course. This brings me to another big thing that I'm sure all of you are wondering about, and that's how this class is going to be graded. If you add up what we've covered so far, you'll notice that we've got those 3 exams that are 60 points each, which adds up to 180 points. We also have the 12 write-ups, each being worth 15 points, which adds up to another 180 points. There's also one other thing I'm doing to sort of reward you for staying in touch and also encourage you to kind of keep up with things on a regular basis. And that's having a weekly lecture, or I guess we would call it section meeting, on those Tuesdays at our scheduled class time. Essentially, I will give you 2 extra credit points, or not 2 extra credit points, I guess 2 points for every week that you attend these things, and there's 12 total weeks that you can do it. I'm only going to make this component to the class worth 12 points. If you're doing some quick math, you've probably realized that means if you make all 12 meetings, you'll have earned 24 points, which means 12 of those points that you earn for that section can be just extra credit points. It means I really do want you to come to those meetings, even if it's just to say hi, check in, maybe ask a couple questions. Because if you are going, functional, actual attendance is necessary. I don't want to see cameras off and no words throughout the entirety of it. If you're going to turn the camera off because you want your privacy, you do have to at least verbally participate in the class then, so I can know that you're mentally there and present. If you do that, you'll get the attendance points for those things, and again, you need to probably attend at least 6 out of the 12 classes to get full credit for that. But if you do more, it's just going to add extra credit to your score. At the very end of the semester, I'm just going to go off the basic standard scale that you see in pretty much all of your classes. If you've earned 90% or more of the 372 points, you'll get some sort of an A. 80% to 89.99% of that 372, you'll get some sort of a B. And then I will always take the upper and lower 3% to give you those pluses and minuses. Please note, though, that means that there's no rounding whatsoever in this class. If you are below 90%, you will not get an A- in this class. But this also means that I won't be messing with your score if everybody's doing really well. So if everybody's getting in that A-, B+ range, you don't have to worry that I'm going to somehow lower your grades. This is a flat scale with no curving and no rounding, which should kind of provide a lot of clarity on where you're at every point in the class. Some of you might be asking, how am I going to be successful in this class? What are some things that you would suggest, especially if this is maybe your first time taking these classes? And a lot of the hints that I want to give you are things that I've already mentioned earlier, but I feel like it's really important to reiterate. One of the first things you really want to do for this class is do the readings. I've known way too many students who have gone through this entire class and not even cracked open the textbook for the course. And I can't understand why in the world they're not doing very well. There's a very obvious reason why they're struggling. That textbook provides a second voice on the material that we're covering, and oftentimes I'm not going to cover areas of interest in their entirety. I'm leaving that second voice on a second topic up to the textbook for brevity's sake. So please make sure that you get the textbook soon and that you start reading each and every time you're working on these things long before you have to do the written assignments. Another thing that's really critical is that you watch the videos each and every week and take notes on those videos, just like you would if this was an in-person class. And when I say watching the videos, I mean literally sitting there like you would sit there in a lecture, giving you the chance to actually pause when you need to pause, and taking notes like you would take notes in a lecture, or maybe even better than you would take notes in a lecture if you don't take many notes during lectures. This will help immensely with your ability to consolidate the information, make sense of it, so when you're studying, you don't have to study so much right up to the exam days or even the days where you have to submit those weekly assignments. Watching the videos also means getting all the way through them, not just clicking on a few slides here and there. Make sure you're there from beginning to end and you're taking notes from beginning to end. And again, you can get just as much out of this class in this medium as you can with it being an in-person class. And the other thing that I really strongly suggest you consider doing in this class on a regular basis is coming to those weekly meetings on Tuesdays and asking questions while you're there. Make sure if you have some confusion about something, you ask about it. It's difficult in this online format for an instructor to sometimes gauge where there might be a need to clarify things. We don't get to see your faces. We don't get to have people interrupt and say, could you explain this again? So having those weekly meetings, I think, can really help you have that opportunity to do what you would do in an in-person class, even if there isn't kind of a full lecture like there typically is during the regular semester. Another thing that's really important when we're talking about how to do well in this class is to try to get those written assignments done well in advance. If you can get everything done by the time we have that lecture on Tuesday, that gives you an extra day or two to refine things and get a great written product up and on the class site so you can get really good grades on these written assignments. And then lastly, I just need to reiterate, the best way to be successful in this class is to treat it like your traditional in-person courses. That means you got your notes out, you're taking lots of them while you're sitting in lecture, you're revisiting them a day or two later, you're really trying to understand how things come together. And if you do that, just like you would in an in-person class, it will translate into a really good score in this class. And most importantly, you'll be able to retain a ton from this course and be able to carry it with you to future classes or programs that you might find yourself in. With all that said, I think you're ready. If you've got any questions, feel free to email them to me or ask them in that first meeting that we're going to have soon. But if I don't hear from you, I wish you the best. Make sure you get that book. Make sure you're cranking away as fast as you can on this stuff. And hoping that you get just as much out of this as you do if this was an in-person class. Best wishes to all of you in your first week or two of classes here, and I hope to see as many of you soon. Take care.